boys and girls, it's Miss Midyet here. I'm here to read aloud to you. I'm going to read from our Read Aloud Number the Stars. I know you have been had different teachers read to you this week, so I'm excited to read chapter 5 today. Who is the dark-haired one? And I wanted to just go back to chapter 4 just to recap what you talked about when you read chapter 4. Some of the things that were happening in chapter 4. We saw again lack of supplies in Copenhagen. We know that the city had been occupied by the Nazi soldiers, and one of the problems with that is they didn't have all the supplies that they normally would. One of the things that they didn't have was leather, and so Kirsty got fish shoes. She was very disturbed by the fish shoes, as I might be myself. I'm not sure about that. But she was very upset about that, but she needed new shoes. Kids grow out of shoes all the time. So she got new shoes, and they were made out of fish skins. Another thing that was revealed is that when the Danes surrendered, it's been about 3 years, the Danes surrendered, and we talked about previously one of the reasons why they surrendered was because they were just a small country, and they couldn't fight against the powerful Nazi regime. So they knew they were going to lose, and the king was really torn about this decision, very conflicted, but the reason why he went through with this and surrendered was because he didn't want to lose his people. He didn't want people to die. And one of the things that he did was he totally destroyed the naval fleet. And the reason why he did that was because he didn't want the Nazi soldiers to have that. We also learned in chapter 4, and this was big, was that the Nazis came to the synagogues. That's where the Jewish population worship. And they gathered the list of all the Jews in the city. So that's a major problem because now we have the Rosens are in danger. So they set forth a plan, and the plan was for Mr. and Ms. Rosen, they're going to go off and they're going to go into hiding. Ellen, she's going to remain with the Johansons, and she's going to pretend to be one of their daughters. And we know that Lise has died, so she's going to pretend to be Lise. So I think that's kind of the main points from chapter 4. So I just wanted to recap for you some of the main points there. So one of the things that I know my class had talked about is the chapters are questions, and oftentimes I feel like the chapters are labeled in a very specific way because I feel like the chapters are kind of like the big idea or the big parts of the chapter, kind of like the main idea. Who is the dark-haired one? So I feel like that's going to be a really important part of this chapter. All right, guys, so hopefully you have your paper, pencil, or whatever you're using to do your stop and dots. So here I go. Do you really think anyone will come? Ellen asked, nervously turning to Anne-Marie. In the bedroom. Your father doesn't think so. Of course not. They're always threatening stuff. They just like to scare people. Anne-Marie took her nightgown from her book in the closet. Anyway, if they did, it would give me a chance to practice my acting. I just pretend to be Lise. I wish we were taller, though. Ellen stood on her tiptoes, trying to make herself tall. She laughed at herself, and her voice was more relaxed. You were great at the Dark Queen in the school play last year, Anne-Marie told her. You should be an actress when you grow up. My father wants me to be a teacher. He wants everyone to be a teacher like him. But maybe I should convince him I should do something else. Maybe go to acting school. Ellen stood on her tiptoes again and made a gesture with her arm. I'm the Dark Queen, she said dramatically. I've come to command the night. You should try saying, I'm Lise Johansen, Anne-Marie said, grinning. If you told the Nazis that you were the Dark Queen, they'd haul you off to a mental institution. Ellen dropped her actress pose and sat down with her legs curled up underneath her on the bed. They won't really come here, do you think? She asked. Anne-Marie shook her head. Not in a million years. She picked up her toothbrush. The girls found themselves whispering as they got ready for bed. There were no need really to whisper. They were, after all, supposed to be normal sisters. And Papa had said that they would giggle and talk. The bedroom door was closed. But the night did seem somehow different from a normal night, and so they whispered. I wonder why they feel that way. She feels like it's different somehow. Another thing I wanted to point out was Ellen was pretending to be Lise. Now remember earlier we talked about how Ellen's just 10 years old. And when Lise died, I think it's been about 3 years, she was 18. So at this point, she would be about 21. So she's pretending to be an older person. I don't think that anyone would really know that. But I think that's something that she's thinking about. She's pretending to be someone she's not, and sometimes that's difficult. All right, I'll continue. But how did your sister die, Anne-Marie? Ellen asked suddenly. I remember when it happened, and I remember the funeral. It was the only time I have ever seen a Lutheran church, but I never knew just what happened. I don't know exactly, Anne-Marie confessed. She and Peter were out somewhere together, and then there was a telephone call, and there had been an accident. Mama and Papa rushed to the hospital. Remember, your mother came and stayed with me and Kirsty? Kirsty was already asleep, and she slept right through the whole thing. She was so little then. But I stayed up, and I was with your mother in the living room when my parents came home that evening, and they told me Lise had died. I remember it was raining, Ellen said sadly. It was still raining the next morning when Mama told me. Mama was crying. The rain made it seem as if the whole world was crying too. So and I think right there you see the emotion of Anne-Marie and just how difficult it must have been for her. She had just lost her sister, and one of the things she said was it was raining out and it seemed like the whole world was crying. So I think that's just figurative language showing how sad she must have been. She's crying tears of sadness. Anne-Marie finished brushing her long hair and handed her hairbrush to her best friend. Ellen undid her braids, lifted her dark hair away from the thin gold chain she wore around her neck. The chain had held the Star of David, and began to brush her thick curls. One thing I wanted to point out to you, this would be a necklace kind of like what she's wearing. This is the Star of David. And one of the things that we talked about was this is something that people of Jewish faith would wear, and it just shows their pride for their faith. We talked about earlier how the Nazi soldiers, they had their own kind of symbol, and that was the swastika. So these are two symbols, and these symbols are representative of these individuals. So this is something that she's wearing around her neck, and it's just to show her pride of her faith. But another thing is, we have to remember that the German soldiers are there occupying their town. So because she is wearing that, she is standing out, and that does put her at danger. I think it was partly because of the rain. They said she was hit by a car. I suppose the streets were slippery, and it was getting dark, and maybe the driver just couldn't see. Anne-Marie went on, remembering Papa looked so angry. He had made one hand into a fist, and he kept pounding it into the other hand. I remember the noise of it, slam, slam, slam. So here she's telling the story of what happened to her sister and how her sister must have died, being hit by a car on a rainy night. And you see Papa's reaction to this, and he's just taking his fist and he's slamming it, slamming it, slamming it. So you see emotions there and what he must have been feeling. Together they got into the wide bed and pulled up the covers. Anne-Marie blew out the candle and drew the dark curtains aside so that the open window near the bed let in some air. See that blue trunk in the corner, she said, pointing through the darkness. Lots of Lisa's things are in there, even her wedding dress. Mama and Papa had never looked at those things since the day she had packed them away. I'm thinking they're probably because it brings up such sadness. Ellen sighed. She had looked so beautiful in her wedding dress. She had such a pretty smile, and I used to pretend that she was my sister too. She would have liked that, Anne-Marie told her. She loved you. Remember, this family has lived in the same apartment building, must have been for years, and they're really close. That's the worst thing in the world, Ellen whispered, to be dead so young. I wouldn't want the Germans to take my family away, to make us live someplace else, but still, it wouldn't be as bad as being dead. Anne-Marie leaned over and hugged her. They won't take you away, she said. Not your parents either. Papa promised that they were safe, and he always kept his promise. And you are quite safe here with us. For a while, they continued to murmur in the dark, but the murmurs were interrupted by yawns. Then Ellen's voice stopped, and she turned over, and over in a few minutes, her breathing was quiet and slow. Anne-Marie stared at the window where the sky was outlined with a tree branch moved slightly in the breeze. Everything seemed very familiar, very comforting. Dangers were no more than odd images, like ghost stories that children made up to frighten others. Things that couldn't possibly happen. Anne-Marie felt completely safe here in her own home, with her parents in the next room and her best friend asleep beside her. She yawned contentedly and closed her eyes. It was hours later, but still dark, when she was awakened abruptly by the pounding of the apartment door. All right, so in previous chapters, I know that we read about how the people in Denmark have a curfew, and so they're not allowed out past 8 o'clock. So this is kind of scary. Someone's pounding on their apartment door in the middle of the night, so let's find out what's happening. Anne-Marie eased the bedroom door open quietly, only a crack, and peeked out. Behind her, Ellen was stirring, her eyes wide. She could see Mama and Papa in the night, moving about. Mama had held a candle, but as Anne-Marie watched, she went to the lamp and switched it on. It was a long time since they had dared to use a strictly rationed electricity after dark, that the light in the room seemed startling to Anne-Marie. Watching through the slightly open bedroom door, she saw her mother automatically close the blackout curtains, making certain that they were tightly drawn. So she's turning on this lamp and she's making sure that the blackout curtains are tightly drawn because she doesn't want anyone on the outside to see that she's turning on this light. Papa opened the door to the soldiers. "This is the Johansen apartment?" A deep voice asked the question loudly in the terribly accented Danish. So remember, these are German soldiers, and one of the things that they talked about previously was that when they questioned them in the street, I think it was in chapter 1 when they were questioning the girls, she said that they speak a different language. They're German soldiers, so they speak German, but when they were trying to talk in Danish, it was very, they weren't very good at it. So here we have the soldiers knocking on their door in the middle of the night, wondering if this is the Johansen apartment. So that is of concern. "Our name is on the door, and I see that you have a flashlight," Papa answered. "What do you want? Is something wrong?" "I understand you are a friend of your neighbors, the Rosens, Miss Johansen," the soldier said angrily. "Sophie Rosen is my friend, that is true," Mama said quietly. "Please, could you speak more softly? My children are asleep." "Then you will be so kind to tell me where the Rosens are." He made no effort to lower his voice. "I assume they're at home sleeping. It's 4 o'clock in the morning after all," Mama said. All right, so right here, I feel like there's a lot of tension because obviously the soldiers are here, it's the middle of the night, and they're very angry, and they're questioning about the Rosens. And in my mind, that would be like their worst nightmare, because we know from previous chapters what's happening to the Jewish population, that they are being removed, and it sounds like now they're being removed from the city of Copenhagen. And where are they taking them? We're going to infer, we're going to guess that they're taking them to these concentration camps, and that's very scary. Not only that, the Rosens are hiding with some friends, but Ellen's there in the home, so they're all in danger at this moment. So let's read on to find out what happens. Anne-Marie heard the soldiers stalk across the living room toward the kitchen. From her hiding place in the narrow sliver of an open doorway, she could see the heavy uniformed man, a holstered pistol at his waist, in the entrance of the kitchen, peering toward the sink. Another German voice said, "The Rosens' apartment is empty. We are wondering if they might be visiting here. They're good friends, the Johansens." "Well," said Papa, moving slightly so that he was standing in front of Amory's door, and she could see nothing except for the dark blur of his back. As you can see, you are mistaken. There's no one here but my family. You will not object to me looking around. The voice was harsh, and it was not a question. It seems we have no choice, Papa replied. Please don't wake my children, Mama requested. There's no need to frighten the little ones. So here in this moment, I really feel like Mom's really trying to protect these girls. And she keeps saying, like, we have children here. Let's be careful with them. The heavy booted feet moved across the floor again and into the other bedroom. A closet door opened and closed with a bang. Amory eased her bedroom door closed silently. She stumbled through the darkness to the bed. Ellen, she whispered urgently, take your necklace off. Just remember, she's wearing the Star of David necklace. That's a dead giveaway that she's Jewish. Ellen's hands flew to her neck. Desperately, she began to try to unlock the tiny clasp. Outside the bedroom door, the harsh voices and footsteps continued. I can't get it open, Ellen said frantically. I never take it off. I can't even remember how to open it. Amory heard a voice just outside the door. What is here? So they're right outside her bedroom door. Shh, her mother replied. My daughter's bedroom. They are all sound asleep. Hold still, Amory commanded. This will hurt. She grabbed the little gold chain and yanked it with all of her strength and broke it. As the door opened and the light filled the room, she crumbled it into her hand and closed her fingers tightly so she's got the necklace in her hands. Terrified, both girls looked up at the 3 Nazi soldiers who entered the room. That is a rude awakening. Could you imagine being asleep, sound asleep, and having these soldiers come into your room? Not only that, 2 of them are the Johansons, and then we have Ellen, who is not their own daughter. This must be very scary. One of the men aimed a flashlight around the room. He went to the closet and looked inside. Then with a sweep of his glove hand, he pushed the floor several coats and a bathrobe, and then hung from the pegs on the wall. So he was kind of like just searching her room. There was nothing else in the room except a chest of drawers, the blue decorated trunk in the corner, and a heap of Kirsty's dolls piled into a small rocking chair. The flashlight beam touched each thing in the room. Angrily, the officer turned toward the bed. Get up, he ordered. Come out here. Trembling, the 2 girls rose from the bed and followed him, brushing past the 2 remaining officers in the doorway to the living room. Amory looked around. These 3 uniformed men were different from the ones in the street. The street soldiers were often young and sometimes ill at ease, and Amory remembered how the giraffe had for a moment let his harsh pose slip and smiled at Kirsty. So she's saying here how these soldiers are different than the ones that confronted her in the street. Remember in chapter 1, when they were running down the street, she was questioned by the soldiers, very scary situation. But here she's showing that those soldiers, they weren't so serious. They were younger, and these soldiers seem like they really mean business. But these soldiers were older and their faces were set with anger. Her parents were standing beside each other and their faces tense, but Kirsty was nowhere in sight. Thank goodness that Kirsty slept through almost everything. If they had awakened her, she would be wailing, of course. She would be angry and her fist would fly. We know Kirsty, she's 5 and she's a bit feisty. And sometimes she says things that maybe she shouldn't. So it's probably a good thing she slept through this. Your names, the officer barked. Amory Johansson, and this is my sister. Quiet. Let her speak for herself. Your name? He glared at Ellen. Ellen swallowed. Lise, she said, and cleared her throat. Lise Johansson? The officer stared at them grimly. Now, Mama said in a strong voice, you have seen that we are not hiding anything. May my children go back to bed. Again, Mama's trying to protect those girls. The officers ignored her. Suddenly, he grabbed a handful of Ellen's hair, and Ellen winced. So winced is a facial feature that you would do, a gesture that you would do when you're kind of like in pain, like, ow, that hurt. So that's what Ellen is doing. So he grabbed it with force. Again, why would he be doing that? Why would he be grabbing her hair? Because one of the things that we talked about is she looks different, right? So before in chapter 1, we talked about how Anne-Marie has blonde hair and Ellen has dark hair. She has dark brown hair. And that's one of the things that sets them apart, the Jewish population. One of the things that they were looking for, obviously this is a big symbol here, but one of the other things that they were looking for is that dark hair. So that's also putting her at danger. He laughs scornfully. So he's laughing as she's kind of in pain here. You have a blonde child sleeping in the other room, and you have the blonde daughter, and they're talking about Anne-Marie. He gestured toward Anne-Marie with his head. Where did you get this dark-haired one? He twisted the lock of Ellen's hair. From a different father, perhaps? So that makes me think that they too are questioning, why does she have dark hair when your other girls have blonde hair? Papa stepped forward. Don't speak to my wife in such a way. Let go of my daughter, or I will report you for such treatment. Or maybe you got her someplace else. The officer continued with his sneer. From the Rosens, perhaps? For a moment, no one spoke. Then Anne-Marie, watching in panic, saw her father move swiftly to the small bookcase and took out a book. He saw that he was holding the family photograph album. Very quickly, he searched through the pages, found what he was looking for, and tore out 3 pictures from 3 separate pages. So back in the day, people oftentimes would have like a book of different photographs. Nowadays, you would probably have them more digital, but a lot of people used to keep pictures. I know my mom has some in a bookcase at her house. But one of the things is that you'll have these book photo albums, is what you would call them, and in each of those, you would have special pictures. Like I remember there's pictures of like my school pictures. I have pictures of when we would go on vacation, things like that. So that's what they're referring to. So they had this album so that he grabbed 3 different pictures. Let's read on. He handed them to the German soldier who released Ellen's hair. You will see each of my daughters, each with their name written in the photograph, Papa said. Anne-Marie knew instantly what photographs he had chosen. The album had many snapshots. All the poorly focused pictures of school events and birthday parties, kind of like mine. But it also contained a portrait taken by a photographer of each girl as a tiny infant. Mama had written in her delicate handwriting the name of each baby daughter across the bottom of those photographs. She realized too, with an icy feeling, why Papa had torn them from the book. The bottom of each page, below the photograph itself, was written the date, and the real Lise Johansen had been born 21 years earlier. Kirsten Elizabeth, the officer read, looking at Kirsty's baby picture. He let the photograph just fall to the floor. Anne-Marie, he read next, glancing at her, and dropped the second photograph. Lise Margaret, he read finally and stared at Ellen for a long, unwavering moment. In her mind, Anne-Marie pictured the photograph that he held, the baby, wide-eyed, propped against a pillow, her tiny hand holding a silver teething ring, her bare feet visible below the hem of an embroidered dress, the whimsy curls, dark. So that was kind of their saving grace, I think. They have this picture of Lise when she was a baby, and she too had curls, and they were dark. And we know that's kind of what Ellen has as well. So I feel like this is a positive thing. Dad really thinking quick on his feet. The officer tore the photograph in half and dropped the pieces onto the floor. Then he turned on the heels of his tiny, shiny boots, grinding into the pictures, and left the apartment. That's really disrespectful. He rips the photos, he drops them on the floor, and he kind of digs around with his feet the pictures. Seems like a very disrespectful thing to do. Without a word, the other 2 officers followed. Papa stepped forward, closed the door behind him. Anne-Marie relaxed the clenched fingers of her right hand, which still clenched Ellen's necklace. She looked down. and she saw that she imprinted in her hand was the Star of David. So right there, scary moment. And what I want to show you next is kind of the things that I would have written as my Stop and Jots. Mine might have been a little bit more detailed, but I just wanted to show you some of the main points that I would have included in my Stop and Jots. Can you see it okay? All right, so important part, I feel like Anne-Marie reveals that one rainy night her sister Lise was hit by a car and killed. So this is a big moment because right here we kind of figure out what happened to her sister. There's some problems that we see. Now we've seen lots of problems given the nature of the time period. One of the things that we see is that electricity is being rationed. Electricity is being rationed. So what ration means, it just means that you're only allowed to use it at certain times, kind of like the fish shoes and the leather. One of the other things that I noticed as a problem is the Nazi soldiers show up at the Johanssons' home in the middle of the night looking for the Rosens. So that's a major problem. So we see a change in how the Nazi soldiers are behaving, and the changes are kind of scary. So the next thing I want to point out to you that I would include in my Stop and Jots are some of the solutions I'm seeing within this particular chapter. One of the things I noticed was Ellen pretends to be Lise. So we have, remember we had, in chapter 4, we had the Rosens who are in danger because now the Nazi soldiers are coming out and they're starting to take the Jewish population. Presumably, we're thinking that they're taking them to concentration camps. But Mr. and Mrs. Rosen, they're in hiding. But Ellen is pretending to be Lise, and she's living at with the Johanssons at this moment. This all happened really quickly. I'm thinking like overnight. So Anne-Marie rips Ellen's Star of David necklace off. So one of the problems when the Nazi soldiers come to the home, one of the problems that we have is we have Ellen, and that's scary because they're looking for the Rosens, and obviously that's Ellen. So when she rips that necklace off, that is a solution to try to hide Ellen's identity, that she's not one of the Johanssons. Another thing I thought was important was Dad shows the baby pictures of the 3 girls and showing that yes, indeed, they did have 3 girls. And I think that bought them some time. I'm not 100% sure, to be honest, if I feel like the soldiers really bought it. I think it bought them some time, but I'm not sure that that's going to be a long-term fix. So I think it was a solution, a temporary solution, but I'm a little concerned what's going to happen next. All right, guys, I hope you did your Stop and Jots. That's really important. And as you guys are reading, make sure you're doing your Stop and Jots as well. These Stop and Jots help you organize your thoughts and really keep hold of what's important. So next we'll be reading chapter 6. So I'm really excited.